So my topic, my topic is, the rise of China and Sino-Indian relations today. And I thought I would talk about basically about what I think India should be thinking about today in its foreign policy and security sort of orientations, and not just toward China, but toward the world in general, but putting relations with China into its proper context, its proper relations with India's relations with the rest of the world. Okay. So anyway, we have to start with economics because it's China's economic success that has made it the force it is in the world today. Okay. So this shows you, this graph shows you, China's GDP from 1985 and it's projected to 2025. Now, these projections here, this straight line projection, I think might not be quite right because I think it's a little high. In reality, it looks as though China's growth is actually slowing, and it's hitting factors that were, in a sense, unanticipated when they did this, when they did this projection. So anyway, here's the situation in 2020. The top five Asian economies, just to put China into a perspective, in a regional perspective. So you can see here, at the top five are these five countries. You can see India is number 3. But there's a pretty far distance between China, which is number 1, and then here's Japan at 2, 3, 4. It's a pretty far distance between number 1 and 2, and then 3, and then 4 and 5. And China has been very successful in changing its role in the world, its economic role, from being basically a poor, labor-rich, developing economy that used its cheap labor to become sort of the manufacturing hub of the world, sort of the world factory for cheap manufactured goods. But then it managed to climb the value chain and accumulate capital so that now it's an important capital exporting country. And you can see this reflected in the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative today. That's all about capital exports. It's all about lending and investing overseas, which of course, then all that money is being spent to pay Chinese firms to do overseas work and gain overseas market share. Okay, so you can see here, this is a sort of a map representation of the countries that are most in debt to China. Okay, and the countries that are sort of the reddish colors are the ones that have some pretty serious debt leverage over them due to BRI and other Chinese lending practices. Now here you can see this kind of the story behind China's rise from being just a sort of a cheap labor source of cheap labor to an economy that's moved into higher value added production and more knowledge and technology intensive industries, and it's accumulated capital to the point where it's now able to export capital to the rest of the world. Okay, so you can see here in this period, and this period here that you can see with the cursor, this is basically before Tiananmen, right? Before Tiananmen, and there was, some. I mean, China was opening up; it was very exciting and everything. But that was not really where the great progress is going to be made. The great progress was made after Tiananmen, interestingly, when Deng Xiaoping decided that uh, despite the risk, despite the political risk, it seemed as though the Western countries were still quite willing to welcome China as a sort of economic partner despite Tiananmen. So he decided to open up China to foreign trade and investment. And this is, this is when reform and opening up really sort of took off. And it's reflected in this. You can see here the rise in inbound investment, inbound foreign investment. And all this inbound foreign investment, this money comes along with technology and management know-how and worker training and management training. And so this surge, this wave of inbound foreign investment is very important to understanding how China got past the sort of, cheap toy and t-shirt factory industrialization stage and into the, middle technology and higher technology industries, okay? So you can see here, there's a bit of a stalled a bit. And this is when China joined the WTO. Okay, now that was a big deal because China promised to become a market economy. You can see things kind of stalled out here because Western firms, couldn't really see the value in investing in a country like China that would not actually be a market economy. So China promised to join the WTO and promised to become a market economy. And you can see here what happened as a result of that. Things kind of opened up. They did sort of reform or privatize some of their state-owned enterprises. And so you had to see another surge, inward surge of inward foreign direct investment, which really helped China finish the whole modernization process. Okay. And then you can see at a certain stage, when China itself was becoming an industrial power, it itself needed to begin investing overseas in order to get resources. And this essentially is the beginning of BRI. BRI grows out of this early period of what was called, the Chinese call it Zhou or to going out strategy, right? Investing overseas in order to gain the resources, the inputs that they would need to keep their big state-owned enterprises developing and growing. So what about India? How does India compare in all this? So you can see this is GDP per capita in constant 2010 dollars from 2000 to 2017. And, India's growth rate is healthy. It's over 5%. China's is over 8%. Okay, and that results in this. Okay, and you have to think about the importance of foreign direct investment and the technology and know-how that comes with it, the global marketing channels that are created through foreign direct investment and all that, that help to drive the difference between India and China here. You can see here the economic growth rates. These are the growth rates over time. This change of real GDP in India versus China in percentage terms. And the red line is India. You can see here, like from 2014 to 2017, India's growth rate was higher than China's. Of course, it was coming from a lower base, but nevertheless, it shows you that India has growth potential. And it hasn't actually been realized even yet. Now here's putting China's growth trajectory in perspective here. You can see here China's real GDP growth by decade. Okay, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000, 2020s. You can see it's been going down after 2000. And that's happening for a number of reasons, but some of the important ones are that they're running into demographic issues. They're also running into institutional rigidities that resist reform. And also actually certain resource constraints. So, you know, one of the big differences between India and China today is the demographic factor, right? So today, India faces a shrinking labor force, right? And you can see here, this is in absolute numbers here. China's working age population has declined since 2012, okay? So you can see here, it peaked out at 920 million, and it's gone down. They estimate by 2030, it'll be down to here 870, okay? So in other words, the number of working people, working age people, in absolute numbers is going down, okay? And at the same time, the smaller number of working people will have to support a growing number of elderly people, so that, for example, let's take it to like 2050, okay? For every 100 working people, there will be 43 or 44 retired people, depending on them, right? Because they won't be working. And at the same time, there'll be 23 children depending on them, too young to work, okay? That's a pretty big burden. So together that's 67 people depending on 100 working people. So, it's unlikely that China, in other words, it's unlikely that China's high growth rate can be sustained into the future, just purely due to demographic dynamics. Here's a comparison of China and India's population pyramids. And you can see here, it's very top heavy. So this is the 40 to 44 age group. It's the biggest. And then the 60 to 64 is pretty big. 55 to 59 is pretty, this isn't like, this is going to be in 2030, okay? And whereas in 2030, the largest group for India is going to be 20 to 24. And then after that, 20 to 25 to 29 and 30. So in other words, China's still going to be pretty young, working in that working age, very few elderly depending on the working age population. So even up through 2030, 2040, India is going to be in a good position to make great economic progress. So the point is that just looking at it demographically, India has an opportunity to replace China as the world's factory. But here's one of the things that I think are important to understand about China's success, and that is, in this, after China joined the WTO in 2000, look what happens to China's exports as a percentage of GDP, from 20% to 36% of GDP. And this is when China makes great progress in terms of GDP growth, and also in terms of climbing the value-added chain, the value-added ladder in terms of its industrial structure. And this is a reflection of inward FDI, inward foreign direct investment, after China joined the WTO. Foreign multinationals came in, they began production, and they exported their production to the rest of the world. This is factory Asia. This is, China as the world's factory, okay? So you can see here, this is, so if for India, if India wants to do this, India's got to think about this, about how to manage this, how to do this kind of thing, right? Where India attracts a lot of capital through, inward FDI and technology, and then generates a lot of work, a lot of jobs, and a lot of exports. Okay, a lot of export earnings. And this was really a big part of China's economic success. Okay, and you can see it tails off here. Now, what China has done is it has very carefully, it has learned from the Soviet Union's experience, and it learned that you really can't compete with the West, militarily. You really need to have a good economic base before you can do any sort of military competition. And so China worked very hard at developing a good, sound economic base with, acquiring all kinds of technologies, relevant technologies, accumulating capital, accumulating skilled workforce, accumulating skilled industrial managers and financial managers. Okay, so here's the situation in Asia by military spending. China's number one. India's number two, but it's pretty far back. Japan's number three. You can see here, okay, how it works. Basically, China's military spending is more than the rest of Asia's military spending combined today. This is in global perspective. Here's China, here's the US, here's Russia. Okay. These are the top three spenders. Now, today we're in an era of Sino-US strategic rivalry. And, you're all aware of the, I'm sure you're all aware of the geopolitical sort of aspects of this rivalry. But, there's, in the economic realm, we have parallels or analogs. Trade war and economic decoupling has begun. Okay, so you can see here that China's share in U.S. manufacturing imports dropped in 2019. Well, it's sort of here, but you can see it came down to 20. It topped out about 25% of total U.S. imports. And in 2019, of course, trade war started in 2018. It's dropped in 2019 to here. And you can see here, US imports from China fell, imports from the rest of the world, that's orange, rose. So this is the trade war year. But even before the trade war from 2016, you can see imports from the rest of the world were growing, and imports from China were sort of mildly going up, but then it's on a downward trend now, and it's likely to continue. So anyway, I think this is the context, the global context for India's problems with China. And basically what India has to contend with is China's dream of national rejuvenation. So, the Deng era of sort of repairing legitimacy, the Communist Party's legitimacy and modernizing China was from 1978 to 2008. And 2008 was the year of the Chinese, the Beijing Olympics. It was also the year of the great financial crisis. And, China was absolutely convinced that the US was in terminal decline and the West was in terminal decline. And that really it was on the fast track to success. And the sort of evidence of this new attitude on the part of China this new confidence, this new boldness in asserting itself in a new role in the world. No longer, keep a low profile and hide your intentions. Now it was sort of, we're a great power, and we're going to assert our great power privileges. And this, of course, began in 2009, and with the whole Arunachal Pradesh thing with the maps and visas with India, but in the East China Sea and in the South China Sea with against Japan and Philippines in particular, who are US allies. Well, it really comes together under Xi Jinping in 2012, in his new era of Chinese socialism, or socialism with Chinese characteristics, as they like to say. And he announces, when he's given leadership, that the Chinese dream is of basically world dominance by 2049. 2049, of course, is the centenary of the Communist Party's victory over the KMT, the Nationalist Party, in governing China, right? In basically taking over state power from the KMT in 2049. I mean, in 1949, and 100 years later, their dream is to, as Xi put it in his speech, be moved to center stage in world affairs, but what he really means is world dominance. So how is China going to do this, right? How is this going to work? First of all, in terms of channeling the people's energies, the popular support, and also effort, right, by all sectors of the party state. Channel national and cultural pride, anger, chauvinism. National, cultural, and pride, of course, China's, proud, and justly so, for its, ancient culture and civilization, but also anger, right? Anger against the West, anger about the, so-called century of humiliation, and chauvinism, this sense that actually, we are better than our neighbors. We do have a natural right to tell them what to do, to rule, to govern Asia. And at the same time, you have this totalitarian ideology and governance that you last saw under Mao, but it seems to be making a comeback under Xi Jinping. And there's lots of evidence for this. The next, party state developmental capitalism. This is a new kind of political economy. It's sort of an offshoot of what was used to be called the East Asian Capitalist Developmental State, developed under Japan and Korea and Taiwan. But this one is adapted to a Leninist party state political mechanism of absolute control. And, but it's a party state that is both red and expert. In Mao's time, you had red versus expert, because the people who were red were peasants and the experts were class enemies. Today, about 90% of new party members are college educated, and they're the best and brightest college graduates. So the CCP has solved that problem of red versus expert. They are both red and expert. They're technocrats and dedicated to a Leninist party dictatorship. Massive military development effort. With this economic base, they can do this. And major power diplomacy based on Xi thought on diplomacy. We can talk about that later. Anyway, so here's some key milestones on this path. In 2012, you have, of course, the 18th Party Congress. Xi Jinping takes power. He announces his Chinese dream of the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. And then in 2013, Xi Jinping becomes president, right? He is appointed president, or is elected president at National People's Congress. So he's now technically and formally in charge of the Chinese state, not just the party, but the state. And so in this role, he really introduces all these new PRC, People's Republic of China initiatives, state initiatives, okay? He talks to Obama in Sunnylands about a new type of major power relations, in which he basically says to the US, we'll respect your core interests in the Western Hemisphere if you respect our core interests in Asia. Our interests are different. They're in competition, but if we manage this competition intelligently, you can see us rise and surpass you, and we won't have a war. Next, BRI, AIIB, Community of Common Destiny, and Periphery Diplomacy Initiatives. These were unveiled in his trips to Kazakhstan and to Indonesia and Southeast Asia in September and October 2013. At the very end of the year, he had meetings where he announced his, the great military and great maritime power dreams. These are parts of the Chinese dream, integral parts of the Chinese dream. And then he announced also the East China Sea ADIZ, Air Defense Identification Zone, and the South China Sea Island Building Campaign. These were decided and begun. 2017, at the next Party Congress, Xi Jinping enters, basically ends one era of socialist development, that is the era of primitive accumulation. He announced, and he's saying that now China's the main contradiction for the party is no longer sort of modernization. The main contradiction now is making socialism more equitable, making, and you can see that today in the Common Prosperity Agenda. Similarly, in the foreign dimension, he begins talking about struggle, right? The need for international struggle to basically rework global governance to conform with, socialism with Chinese characteristics, which today has become basically what everybody's calling Xi Jinping thought, right? And so, the goals here, ending poverty and building a new model of socialism in China. And the goal externally is replacing 500 years of Western domination with a new era, in world history, with a new era led by the CCP, under the banner of socialism with Chinese characteristics. Okay, so India's dilemmas, or India's basic dilemma here. So does India resist Chinese domination, or does it fall in line? Clearly, China's vision is of a unipolar Asia under Chinese suzerainty, under Chinese governance. And of course, this is not just limited to Asia, it extends across the BRI footprint. Right? Basically, all of the developing world, China wants to lead. And so, this is India's dilemma. Do you resist this agenda, or do you fall in line? And, of immediate concern to India, I think, is that China wants South Asia inside its great power sphere of governance. And it's going to do it with or without India. I think you can see that very clearly today in its diplomacy and its security policy toward India's neighbors and in the Indian Ocean region. And what's happening is that, BRI and the Community of Common Destiny is being built around India. So even though India has opted out of BRI and opted out of the China's Community of Common Destiny, not nevertheless, China continues to sort of construct these structures around India. And of course, this is backed by the PLA, by the military power of the PLA. Now, India has also some difficult, fallback strategies it can use, because if it can't compete with China one-on-one, resist China one-on-one, well, maybe it can find an ally in South Asia or in Eurasia, right? But here, India, I think, ends up in 2-against-1 games, right? Here, it's in Eurasia. This is the Russia-China-India triangle. But here, I think this resolves into a Russia-China partnership at India's expense, particularly after the Ukraine crisis. And then here in South Asia, it's pretty difficult for India to get around this one, because this Pakistan-China partnership is kind of hard for India to deal with, just purely in the South Asian regional context. So for this reason, India has turned to the Quad, right? And so here the question, it's basically, I believe, a hedging strategy for India. India is sort of hedging, using it as a hedge, and it's hoping that somehow the Quad might help India deal with China. It's also hoping for, any sorts of benefits that might come its way as a result of associating with the Quad powers. But it's also avoiding commitment, right? Because India wants to remain autonomous. It wants a sort of multi-alignment strategy, which might be viable, except that in these other games, it's not working. Okay, and it probably wouldn't work. So I think India is really in a dilemma here, and China's put it there. It's not the U.S. or anybody else. It's really China put India here. And then with the Ukraine war, there are new dilemmas. Okay. First of all, there's the Western sanctions question. Now, this is a question of, UN Charter norms and obligations. And so it's understandable that India would not want to participate in Western sanctions towards Russia for pragmatic reasons. But for principled reasons, it's difficult to see how India could do that, because I think India is a firm believer in the UN system and the rule of law, international rule of law. But the thing about China's support for Russia and defiance or rejection of Western sanctions is that it's principled. It's a principled stand against the Western democracies and for Russia's prerogative as a great power that deserves a sphere of influence. It deserves to tell the little countries around it who they can associate and who they can't associate, and what they have to do to please the great power. Okay, and this, of course, mirrors China's attitudes in Asia. Okay, so I think it's very important here. This is the dilemma for India. What's our position on Western sanctions? Is it principled, or is it just purely pragmatic? And I don't think India's provided a clear answer on that. And then Russia or the West? Russia, the Russian partnership for India has to be seen in short and long-term perspective. short term, there are lots of benefits, but longer term, it's difficult to see how Russia is going to sustain itself without really mortgaging itself to China. And if Russia mortgaged itself to China, and India is linked to Russia in this in a significant way, well, you end up in the 2 against 1 game with Russia and China against India's interests. If India wants to remain sort of independent and sovereign in South Asia. So the question is really, is Russia a lifeboat or is it a sinking ship? So I think these are the dilemmas that China's rise has put India in, and I'll stop it there. So for Q&A.
So, David, would you like to have the question answer session now?
Yeah. I think so, because I didn't want to take more than 30 minutes, actually.
Yeah. So, no, there's no time limit, at least for you.
You want to take a break? Do you want to take a short break so you can gather your thoughts?
No, it will go on. Provided you are having no trouble at your end. So now I ask the students to ask questions and be quick. First introduce yourself and then ask the question.
Yeah, and if you can turn on your camera when you ask a question, because it's kind of hard for me to answer a black screen,
Right. Yes, come on with the questions. Be quick. Don't detain the guest for long.
The other thing, of course, is, I'm always happy to entertain questions by email.
David, before they ask the questions, I would like to have your views on 1 or 2 issues relating to India-China relations and all that. And last time when we met at Nanjing, you had that rise of China in East Asia and all that. How do you think that things have changed into 2020, from 2014 to 2020, to how the situation is
2022? That was 6 years ago.
Yeah.
So, well, yeah, they've changed a lot. Back then, it was unclear how far Xi Jinping would be willing to go in challenging the so-called rules-based order, and also challenging not just the rules-based order, but challenging the sovereignty of and territorial integrity of its neighbors, and also how far it would go in the questions like Taiwan and Hong Kong and Xinjiang, and Tibet, and also how far it would go in terms of cracking down on domestic human rights lawyers and journalists and legal scholars and academics and cultural figures. So in the past 6 years, we've seen things actually go in a sort of a Maoist direction to an unexpected degree, I think. Yeah, it's, well, I personally am a little disappointed, because I was thinking things, because I decided to go to China and stay there in 2011 before Xi Jinping took power. And I was sort of thinking that, well, this would be very interesting to see China up front, very close, to see whether it continues its liberalization and integration into with the rest of the world. And I didn't really think that it would basically turn its back on the system that had basically given China the best 30 or 40 years it's ever had for centuries, literally for centuries, right? So anyway, it has decided to challenge the existing order. And, maybe, looking at it from China's point of view, given how angry it is and how wounded, well, it's hard to separate, party propaganda from actual, cultural realities, but they've done a good job of making the entire Chinese populace angry and resentful toward the West. Yeah, things have changed to a surprising degree, I think. Yeah.
David, one more question to you about India-China relations. India faces trade deficit with China. It's a well-known fact.
Yeah.
And it's a worrying, thought for India. But the other deficit is in the field of trust. There's a trust deficit also between the two countries. How the two countries can overcome this trust deficit?
Well, I think, going back all the way back to Nehru and how he thought, Zhou Enlai and Mao betrayed him, right? And the betrayals have just kept coming. So I think you've got to, I don't know, trust is easily lost and very difficult to gain. And you remember the spirit of Wuhan in 2018, after the Doklam crisis? Okay, that was trust regained. And then you had Galwan. Okay. Now,
you were there in India at that time?
I was. Yeah, I think I was visiting you. During Doklam, I was visiting you.
Yeah.
And in 2020, I don't know if I was in Goa or not then, but anyway, so Doklam, and then of course now Wang Yi's just visited India, saying, "Oh, let's forget about the border issue. Is not important. What's more important is building trust." So I don't know. It's kind of up to India, what it requires to have a trusting or trustful relationship with China. But in international relations and in foreign policy, trust, based on not just interests, but also values, it has the firmest foundation, right? When two countries have similar values and also similar interests and similar goals, that's the firmest foundation for trust. But if they're fundamentally different in terms of values and in terms of interests and in terms of goals, and if you're already having armed conflict with that country over things and irresolvable conflicts, it's difficult to see how you can establish trust, right? I mean, you can try, but then the problem is you can be disappointed, and in trying to trust somebody, you always open yourself up. You always make yourself vulnerable to loss and disappointment. So that's difficult. I don't know. It's up to India to decide how it wants to go.
So now, any more questions from the students, please? Come on, be quick.
I think they're tired.
No, I tell you, you have so very well and very comprehensively you have explained things that there is nothing left to question you. I mean, everything is very clear. I mean, and
I don't know. There's always room for questions, about these things, but I will. I'll put it in the chat box, so that students can look at it and.
Are there any questions in the chat box?
Good evening, sir. I am Akriti Verma, a final year student of. Am I audible and visible? Am I audible properly? Hello.
Oh, hold on. I'm trying to. I'm trying to save the presentation. It says I need to change the name on it. Hold on. I'm just trying to, because I don't want to lose this. Yeah, I want to be able to send it to you. Go ahead.
Good evening, sir. I am Akriti Verma, a final year student of Masters in International Relations. So first of all, thank you for this wonderful presentation and session. So I had a question regarding the China's BRI. So like during this COVID during this pandemic, the BRI has gone up, or it has the significance has slightly declined.
Yeah, so BRI has changed shape, so to speak, during COVID. It used to be focused on very large loans, infrastructure loans, very large construction projects. Things like the CPEC, CPEC with Pakistan, that's a perfect example of large loans, big, heavy industrial construction, right? But the COVID thing has basically stopped that because supply chains are broken because of COVID. And not only that, but developing countries can no longer take loans. They don't have the money to pay the loans back. They don't even have money to pay back the existing loans they have. And China doesn't have money to lend. China needs a lot of its own savings now to fund, decoupling, to fund its own domestic economic development. So that model of BRI is passing away. It'll hang around for a while because infrastructure projects take years and years, once begun to finish, right? But China has changed BRI to other areas, like in terms of vaccines, health, public health technologies and products, digital products, consumer-oriented products, also digital infrastructure projects. These are less expensive and they're more commercially viable. In other words, they're more likely to produce profitable businesses. And they're also commercially investable. So what BRI now is sort of turning into a investment and trade promotion thing, turning away from investment in the basic infrastructure and now promoting Chinese banking, Chinese industries, Chinese trading companies, Chinese service providers to get into the developing world. So it's so BRI has, and also BRI is being used to promote cultural cooperation, right? Educational, cultural, media cooperation, and also it's being used to promote security cooperation, police, domestic security forces, also PLA, Navy, military visits, things like that. So BRI is it's really a cooperation platform. It's not a form. There's no one formula for it. It's a platform that was constructed, and it was deliberately not clearly specified. It was left vague in order to allow it to become this flexible cooperation platform that would change as China itself evolved, and also as its own interests and goals would evolve over time. Yeah, so it's you have to look at it that way. It's not a one-off thing. Yeah, it's a program. I mean, so don't forget the China dream is something that's supposed to go to 2049. So it's a long range vision.
Thank you, sir, for the question. Thank you.
Well, thanks for the question.
And any other question? Or
Yes, sir. I have one question to ask.
Okay, Myra.
Okay. Good evening, sir. I'm Myra. I'm a final year undergrad student pursuing political science. So my question is, how much success can we equate to the 1978 economic reforms in China to its current success in its economy? Like, can we say that it was right steps taken at the right time, or can we say it was a planned move with some vision to be held?
Oh, you mean in 1978 when Deng Xiaoping came to power?
Yes,
And
the economic
instituted.
reforms and also the special economic zones and the removal of the tariff barriers and all those things.
Yeah, well, that came a little later. That is, 78, of course, was just when Deng Xiaoping came to power. But the special economic zones and all those things came more in the 80s. And it was a learning process for China. It was, trial and error. It was, Deng Xiaoping and Hu Yaobang actually, they're kind of an embarrassment for the CCP because they promoted and wanted to see political liberalization in China along with economic liberalization. And so they've been sort of covered over and forgotten in party lore and but those two men were very important in delivering the economic success that China had. That reform and opening up period, a lot of the credit belongs to them for the policies they instituted in the countryside and also in the cities and the industries. So yeah, it would be, if you were interested in that period, the more useful way to go about it would be to look at the reforms, the economic reforms instituted by Zhao Ziyang and supported by Hu Yaobang.
Okay, so thank you so much for your information. Thank you.
hello.
Okay,
Any more
I think
question?
So there is also a question he has sent me the question over chat box. So the question is from Akhilesh Trivedi. So his question goes, as you mentioned regarding the Russia, China, and India trio in Eurasia, and Pakistan, China, or India trio in South Asia. So could you please elaborate a bit more on that, like how it is definitely going to influence, it is definitely going to have an impact on the world order, but like how it will have the impact. If you could elaborate.
Well, I mean, I realize that India has this special relationship with Russia that goes back, to the Soviet era. And, traditionally and historically, the Soviet Union or Russia, has supported India in important ways, even against China. But today, I think the situation is very different. And you could see it from Lavrov's visit to Beijing just yesterday or today, when China and Russia swore, it's basically a partnership against the West, the evil West. And then, of course, on February 4th, when Putin visited Xi in Beijing for the start of the Olympics, they issued this 5,300 word communique talking about their boundless or endless or limitless partnership, and how they were going to, how China opposed NATO and NATO expansion, and how Russia would support Taiwan, and how both sides would support each other in trying to rectify the injustices in global governance created by the Western democracies. So I think the relationship between China, and particularly after the war, Russia is going to be terribly dependent on China. And there's no way that Russia could ever be an honest broker, or even a broker or a go-between between China and India, because Russia is just basically going to have to do what China tells it to do. And the situation is going to be radically different. It has already changed, and Russia will be going to China hat in hand. Every time a Russian visits China from now on, they're going to be asking for things, begging for favors.
David, let me tell you one thing. The last question will be answered more clearly, exhaustively in the next issue of FPRC General 49, Russia's pivot to China. And let me tell you, within next 48 hours, the issue will be with you. I will send the link within next 48 hours.
Okay. Okay, great. Yeah.
So all these questions are there. All these questions are there. And you too have responded to them. And very senior, Indian diplomats who were posted in Moscow. One was posted in China. Then other, academics from US and India, they have all responded to that questionnaire. And I have gone through it. I have almost finalized it, and I think in the next 48 hours the link will be with you. So the students will have the advantage of knowing the answer. The last question, I think that can be I think explained very exhaustively. So thank you, David, for sparing time. And when do you propose to come to India next time? Any plans?
No concrete plans right now. Right now, I'm thinking about going to Taiwan, actually. Okay. So, but no concrete plans to go to India. Although, if things actually really do open up, it would be nice. Yeah, it'd be a lot of fun. I'd enjoy
So
that.
I think
I love Indian food.
physical presence is being invited. I mean, I told you that on 25th I was invited at India Habitat Center. You had also visited there. So gradually things are opening up. The restriction on international traveling has been removed, and I think we can see these webinars and conferences and seminars in India also. So thank you very much, David, once again.
Okay.
Oh,
Yes.
bye.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay.
Take care.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, I close the session.